to this committee and the Cause Committee. So that's my appointments. And so, Mr. Chairman, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, everyone. And I want to welcome everyone to the January 22nd, 2020 meeting on the Agency Operations Committee and remind everyone that this meeting is being broadcast live via the internet. The first agenda item is the approval of the minutes for the October 23rd, 2019 Agenda Operations Committee meeting. Do I have a motion for the approval of the minutes?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Schwartz. May I second?
Second.
Second by Dr. Farias. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Seeing no opposition, the motion passes. Next is the consent calendar for the entire meeting. The consent calendar includes non-controversial items that we think can be approved without comment or discussion. This allows us to save time for other items that need more of our attention. Highlighted items in gray are on the consent items on the agenda. I want to point out that our practice of putting most of the rules on the consent calendar, given the extensive vetting process that they go through. Of course, any board member can request that an agenda item be removed from the consent calendar. That will give us the opportunity to discuss that item or items fully later in the meeting. Does any board member want to remove any agenda item from the consent calendar? Does any board member want to add any item to the consent calendar? Do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Motion by Dr. Farias, second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Stetman. All in favor? Aye. Hearing and seeing no opposition, the motion passes. The next item on our agenda is public testimony. I am told we have no public testimony, so that takes us to agenda item 5. All right. Page 6, correct? Consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to the approval of a request from the University of North Texas to establish a branch campus in Frisco, Texas. The next item on the agenda typically falls under the Committee for Academic Workforce and Success, but due to the timing and need for action, this item has been placed on the Agency Operations Committee. At this time, I will hand the meeting to Dr. Farias, Chair of the Committee on Academic Workforce and Success, to lead the discussion for this agenda item. Dr. Farias.
Thank you, Mr. Raven. The next item on the agenda is the consideration, as Mr. Raven had said, of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee on relating to the approval of a request for the University of North Texas to establish a branch campus in Frisco, Texas. Dr. Stacy Silverman, the Interim Assistant Commissioner for Academic Quality and Workforce, and Dr. Andrew Lofters, Program Director, will present this item, be available for questions. Dr. Silverman?
Thank you, Dr. Farias. As you mentioned, this item would typically be considered at the Cause Committee. However, in order to ensure that the institution can submit its required materials to its regional accreditor, the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on Colleges, or as we call it, SAC-COC, and proceed in securing the donated land, the institution requested the item be considered at the January board meeting. So staff did not have the necessary materials in time for the December 13th cause meeting, but did have all the materials ready to bring the item forward for consideration at the AOC and the January board meeting. So the request from the University of North Texas is to establish a branch campus in Frisco, and this is the first such request to be considered by the board since 2007. A branch campus is an off-campus educational unit defined in board rule as a major secondary location of an institution offering multiple programs, typically with its own administrative structure and usually headed by a dean. Unlike a teaching site, a branch campus must be established by either the legislature or approved by the coordinating board. UNT currently offers many of its undergraduate and graduate level degree programs at its 2 established teaching sites in Frisco, at UNT at Frisco Hall Park and at UNT Frisco Inspire Park. The new location will allow the institution to eventually transfer programs from its current locations into a new, more permanent structure on the branch campus. Staff reviewed the materials UNT submitted and found that based on several factors, but particularly the increase in student enrollment, there is a need for a branch campus. Staff found that it would not adversely duplicate programs offered by other institutions within an hour's driving time of the proposed center, and that the branch campus would provide access to students who might not otherwise enroll in upper division courses or graduate level programs. Staff confirmed that the institution has adequate faculty and resources in place, and overall the branch campus could provide students access to high-quality teaching and learning and would provide students additional administrative student support services. The staff recommendation is for approval, and there are institutional representatives available to address the members' questions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Silverman. Dr. Loftus, would you like to say something at this point?
Thank you. The programs that are already in the Frisco area have been notified to all the institutions within a 50-mile drive of these proposed branch campus, so they all have been notified of programs by UNT in this area, so they have had prior notification that they are doing operations in the area. Their enrollment has increased, as Dr. Silverman said, pretty dramatically over the last 2 years. So I have all that information and any other questions that you need answered.
And committee and board, I have pretty much grilled Dr. Lofters and Dr. Silverman extensively, and great questions from the UNT president we'll visit with in just a moment, and the vice provost. And so thank you, Dr. David Gardner as well, and your staff, because this is an important proposal. It's my understanding that this is the first time the coordinating board will look at approving a branch campus since 2007, board. I don't know if any of you are aware of that. So this is a critical program, and I agree there's definitely a big need in Frisco area, and UNT has done an astounding proposal. But thank you for putting up with my calls and questions, and we want to make sure we get this right since this hasn't been done since 2007 by the coordinating board. So thank you, staff, for doing that. At this time, I'd like to invite up.
Can I ask a question first?
Yes, you can.
Okay, so, and I've asked this question over the years, and one of these days it'll stick. Okay, so a teaching facility, what did you call it? A teaching facility?
It's a higher education teaching site.
Teaching site, okay. That does not require coordinating board approval.
That's correct. It requires notification by the institution who is planning to offer instruction in a certain area to notify all institutions within 50 miles of the teaching site.
Is the one that the A&M College Station site in McAllen, is that a teaching site?
That is a single institution center. That had to come in front of the coordinating board for approval.
Because my understanding is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Lofters and Dr. Silverman, but that is Texas A&M Higher Ed Center.
It's a higher ed center, correct. Did I say
McAllen.
that wrong? I'm sorry. It's a single institution
Right.
center, which those are higher education centers, which are either a multi-institutional teaching center, a university system center, or a single institution center. Those need to come in front of the board for approval, and that one did go in front of the board.
And the teaching site is something less robust?
It's not as extensive as a center. By the way that the process goes is that the institution first starts to, what they want to say is gauge interest in certain programming by putting out a program in a certain area. And then after they do that a few more times and you get a certain number of programs, it's not really a defined number. It says, substantial number of programs, then they can apply to the board to become either a higher education teaching center or a branch campus.
Yeah, my question is, okay, so what exactly, what authority was taken away from us in 2013? So in other words, obviously not this, because we have to approve.
So,
Facilities.
exactly. As Dr. Farias was saying, we no longer approve a building, so the facility approval was taken away from the coordinating board.
But not the expansion or into another geographic campus, except if it's a teaching site, basically.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Well, that's my question. Maybe it'll stick, and I won't ask the question again, but I'm not sure.
I need to ask the question now. So a site is distinguished from a center based upon what?
A site usually has a very small, limited number of programs.
Okay.
It's not, they don't own any facilities or anything. There's not a dean usually in place that is over that particular site.
Okay.
A higher education center requires board approval or needs to be legislatively authorized. They have a more extensive array of programs at this location, and it's usually headed by a dean or some type of administrative structure.
Okay. So a site can actually be comprised of more than one university. So you could put a four-year institution and a junior college together at a site, but you can't do that at a center.
No, you can do that at a center if it's a multi-teaching institute, multi-teaching higher education center. They could do that there. A site is more of if I can give you an example, let's just say that a University of Texas wanted to offer a certain program, and they could do more than 50% of it at an off-campus site, let's just say at a school district here in the Austin area. They can propose to have the EDD in educational leadership to be taught at this specific school district.
Oh, okay.
They can then do 50-mile radius notification. If there's no objections, that can become one of their sites for this particular program. It's not as much as that all the different institutions come to this one particular location. It's just a place where they've been approved to offer instruction.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Farias.
Okay, so clear, Chairman Stedman, getting there? Chair, along with these lines, so UNT already has teaching sites. There's two, correct? In Frisco now. So they're kind of a realignment. So Chairman Stedman asked me an interesting question, like the degrees, how do they read, in terms of, and that's a question that I've been asked before as well. So let's say the campus in McAllen, I know that the students there actually go to College Station and their degree. Will their degree read Texas A&M University? And that is different because that is a actual higher ed center. They get an Aggie ring. They get to go to the Aggie football games. What does their diploma say? Texas A&M?
It would be Texas A&M University.
Right.
Correct.
See, that's the difference. Whereas the teaching site, it would be...
It would still be
Texas A&M.
Texas A&M. Whoever is the...
Well, like the UNT example now, their UNT teaching site in Frisco right now says UNT.
Correct.
Okay, and so that's not going to change now that it's going to be a branch campus.
Correct.
It's actually more affiliated, I'd say.
Correct.
Okay. Does that answer your question? Okay, that was a good question. A month ago. Okay, so I have a good understanding of it, Stuart, now, thanks to these folks and the
I'm
UNT
just
folks. Thank
glad that you're chairman of the cause committee. I'm very grateful.
Let's invite up our guests, please, from the University of North Texas and the system. I'd like to ask to come forward President Neil Samatras, President of University of North Texas, Dr. Jennifer Cowley, Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs, Mr. Bob Brown, he's the Senior Vice President for Finance and Administration, and Ms. Elizabeth Voigt, who's Assistant Vice Provost for Accreditation and Institutional Effectiveness. Welcome. We're thankful that you all are all here and to be able to be resource witnesses to the proposal and be available for questions after a presentation. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Farias, and thank you to the board. We began conversations with our colleagues in the city of Frisco several years back, and it was very clear that they felt that the city's explosive growth, especially in the tech arena, was required that they affiliate with a research institution. As you probably know, the University of North Texas is a Carnegie Tier 1 institution, a research institution, and we had felt for a long time that the Frisco area presented a unique opportunity to us to grow, to better interact and integrate with the corporate community, to really help to streamline jobs and career creation for our students. And there was a need. If you follow community college parlance, there's a kind of an old saw that says students who are commuting will drive up to 23 miles. Of course, if you have to drive on 35, it's probably about 10. But they will pursue a degree, but it's hard, and there are not a lot of co-located institutions around there. So Frisco felt this was important for their economic development. Our partnership has flourished. You'll hear tomorrow from the head of their economic development agency. And I will tell you that it's probably the best town-gown relationship I've ever seen in my life. We're happy to be there. We're working in innovative ways with the corporate community around us. And it's a great way for us to launch really innovative and creative new career majors. We're working in collaboration with the Dallas Cowboys. We're working in collaboration with the Cinemark Corporation and a number of others around, and some of them I'm not allowed to discuss yet. But that type of interaction, we believe, is the future of this region, will continue to drive growth from there up the northern corridor. And so we come here today asking for an approval for this branch campus to honor our commitments to the city of Frisco and to help them grow and flourish. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to our provost, Jennifer Cowley.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we are the University of North Texas, so we serve our region, and we recognize the explosive growth that is happening in Collin County. The growth projections expect that we're going to have 2 million or more people in that county over the next 15 years. The city of Frisco recognized that if they were going to have a strong economy, they had to have a university partner. In 2010, we began offering courses and later degree programs at the Collin Higher Education Center, which is located at Collin College. We recognized that was working, but also recognized we needed to expand and do more. In 2016, we opened at Hall Park, began offering additional programs there, have had great success with growth in the programs that we're offering. In 2018, we entered into a partnership with the city of Frisco. The city of Frisco provided a building in Spire Park where we're currently offering additional programming, as well as providing 100 acres of land for a future long-term home for our Frisco branch campus that we're seeking. We have completed the master plan for the campus. We are currently in design for the first building, and we expect to be able to complete construction to offer classes on the permanent campus by 2023. So we're here today to ask for your approval to allow us to move forward. We've expanded to 34 academic programs. You've seen the enrollment numbers. They're very robust, and in order to keep up with the projected growth, we need to be able to move forward with our permanent campus. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Voigt, would you like to say a few words? Thank you. And Mr. Brown?
I'm here to answer questions as well.
Okay, well, we appreciate y'all coming all the way from North Texas for the presentation. Again, for the board, this is a committee item for the Academic Workforce Success, which is handled right now through the AOC, Agency Operations Committee. So at this point, if any members have any questions for our panel about the proposal. Any questions?
I don't have any.
I don't. I want to thank Dr. Samarstik again for our conversations and appreciate, and also to Chancellor Rowe, who I've spoke with as well. Thank you very much for and working with our staff on this important proposal with UNT. They've been very, very good conversations. I appreciate you've answered all the questions that I have and the committee have, so thank you. So at this time, if there's no other questions, I would like to ask for a motion to approve the request to establish a branch campus in Frisco, Texas for University of North Texas.
So moved.
Again, okay, I was just going to explain. This is, of course, something that is going to come before the board tomorrow if it's approved by the committee, okay?
So
Yes.
moved.
Moved by Mr. Raven. Do I have a second? Although at this point, my question is to Mr. France, it's got to be the committee members only.
Pause committee, so we got to figure out, okay, I know you're on it, I'm on it, Cody's on it, and you're on it.
Yeah, so only people can vote are the people that are on the, yes, the
I have my cheat sheet in the
Voting.
computer, and I just shut it down, so.
voting
I think
members
I-
are those that are on the Academic and Workforce Success Committee only for this particular item.
Mary, to the rescue.
And first, do we have a quorum for the committee?
Oh, yeah, we got plenty of people. Okay, so.
I'm here.
So you're not on it. Okay, so, you know what, I'm on it, and I'll make the motion.
Okay,
that-
you were on
okay.
it, that's right.
And then Emma, yes, you are. Welcome's on it. He's not here. Sam, you're on it. Now appointed you on it. So,
So we're good. Are we good?
okay. So I'll make a motion.
Motion by Mr. Stedman, second by Ms. Schwartz. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
All right.
Okay, any opposition? Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. We appreciate that. And at this time, Mr. Raven, that completes the agenda item.
Thank
for
you,
the
Dr.
committee.
Farias. That was smooth, wasn't it? I think so. All right, the next agenda item is agenda item 5C, report on grants and contracts. The next item under agency operations is a report on grants and contracts, including those exceeding $1 million. This item does not require any action. Mr. Bill Franz, General Counsel, and Ms. Linda Natal, Director of Contract and Grant Management, are available for questions. Mr. Franz. Any questions for Mr. Franz or Ms. Natal, if she's here?
I just glanced at this list, and so what is RFA, basic RFA? What does that mean? Okay, it says, there's a list of these contracts. It is academic
Yeah.
division, performing agents like Dallas County Community College District. So descript.
I think that's the name of it.
Okay, but that's a contract that was awarded? Yes. Okay. Yeah, no other questions.
Any other questions for Mr. Franz or Ms.
Quick
Natal?
question. I know that these are only those that are executed over $1 million. Approximately how many other contracts does the agency oversee approximately?
Contracts and grants outstanding. And there should have been another packet that contains the contracts under $1 million between mid-September and early December.
Yeah, we have it.
They're there.
We have it.
Okay.
That's right, I just saw it. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you both. Agenda item 6A, review of the fiscal year 2020 financial report to the board. The first item under finance is a review of the fiscal 2020 financial report to the board. This item does not require any action. Mr. Ken Martin, Assistant Commissioner for Financial Services and Chief Financial Officer, will present this item to the committee and be available for questions. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. This item I bring before the board every quarter. It is a financial report that's intended for board members. We have a couple board members that are newer, and I will take a little bit of time to walk you through the report in more detail. But to step back, the report is for the period that before you, September 1st, 2019 through the end of November 2019. So basically our first quarter of this fiscal year. So there's not a lot of activity that's notable, but I will take, if you don't mind, just a couple minutes. I'll walk you through the report. That way, future reports, you're better able to interpret them and evaluate and ask any questions. So if you don't mind, if you can pull up this report that's in your packet, and we'll just turn to this page here. When we do the agency's actual budget, so we get from the General Appropriations Act, legislative appropriation funding, we then take that money and we develop actionable plan, a budget, and we divide that into two main categories. One category is operating, you'll see here, or think of that as administration, and then trustee, or think of that as programmatic. The actual program monies like Texas grant, the actual grant money. This provides a breakout of just a visual of those two, what's been either expended, encumbered, or is projected to be expended, and then what's still available and being worked. So you can see that most of the money already has been assigned or being assigned at this point in time. This next page gets you into more detail. So this actually breaks out the strategies. So you look at our operating, which if you look to the far left column, the A11 through A18, and then also the B11 through B14, you have the direct programmatic in the A strategies, and then you have the indirect, so our overhead, our agency administration in the other ones. And those comprise the operating that I mentioned on that first slide earlier. And then everything down below, from the C's to D's, et cetera, on the next page, are all of the programs where we receive the funding. You heard Perkins, that's also on here further on down. You'll see on the page, the original budget. So we come before the board to approve the agency's budget for the fiscal year or the biennium, and once it's approved, that's the budget we'll start operating under. But we'll also potentially have budget adjustments, and I'll mention that in another page coming up. But then you can see the expenses that occurred year to date and encumbrances. So an encumbrance is basically an obligation. Think of it as we've performed a contract, we may have done an RFP, request for proposals, and then we actually ink a contract with a vendor or an entity, an institution. That would be money that's encumbered. But we have not expended. The money has not been expended to the entity yet. They either need to perform based on that contract, or it's a timing item that will come up. And then you can see the available budget. So this allows divisions to see what they still have available and still needs to be worked on. The next page here briefly is our federal programs. And the reason we separate these out is the federal programs operate on a different time frame. They operate on the federal fiscal year. So it's federal money assigned to the agency, but it operates on a federal fiscal year basis, not a state agency fiscal year basis. And so we break it out a little bit differently, but similar expenditures, obligations, but we also have what we've drawn down. So we actually request from the federal government the cash so that we can make our payments. And I mentioned budget adjustments. On this page, you approve the original budget, as I'll call it, but then this page lets you know any adjustments we've made from that original budget. Most of these pages you'll see, it'll say UB, various programs, et cetera. We, in the General Appropriations Act, typically have what's called UB authority, unexpended balance authority, or think of it as carry forward authority. So we can take and appropriated funds from one year that have not been fully utilized or expended, and we can move them and assign them into the current appropriation year. Not all programs have that. Typically at the end of the biennium, most of the programs do not, but some we do. And at the beginning of the next year, we'll take any available funding, we'll automatically UB that to the next appropriation year. One of the items that's not on the first page, and it's actually not in the General Appropriations Act in any detail, is the loan program. And we have a few. We have the largest is our College Access Loan Program, but we also have a Be On Time Loan Program, this is the last year. It's been canceled, and this is the last year for renewal students. But we still have loans that we have to service. And then we have the Texas Armed Services Scholarship Program that we receive appropriated general revenue for, and we do administer that. This gives you a little bit of idea of, you can see in the bottom left corner, debt service funds. That's how much funding we accumulate to pay our bondholders. And I'll talk in more detail about bonds in a couple of our upcoming agenda items, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, but I'll get in a lot more detail about that in a minute. And then we have available loan funds. So when we do sell bonds, that funding that we receive is what we utilize to issue loans. So one is the blue section, what we're giving out to have the potential to give out to students. The orange section, what we need to pay our investors that purchased our bonds. And then we have unappropriated cash from a couple programs, mostly the Be On Time program and Physician Education Loan Repayment Program, that we have received more money than what was appropriated for us to spend. And so it's with the agency, but it's in an unappropriated status. So it is cash, but it needs to be appropriated by legislature. And this just gives you...
Mr. Martin?
Yes, sir. I've got a question. Okay, go back to... Okay, so unappropriated cash, I mean, that's in an... How much is that? 188 million?
That is correct.
And that's sitting in some coordinating board account?
It is with the comptroller, but it is in our account, appropriated or an unappropriated account with the coordinating board. These two accounts, the PELRP I'll call it, and the Be On Time or the BOT, received money for either tuition set-asides for the Be On Time program, and those continued to come into the agency, but over the course of a 10-year period, the appropriations for it were less than the amount we were collecting. So,
Right. My question is just, so debt service funds, available loan funds, it's a treasury function question. Where do these funds reside, and who manages that, and what are they invested in?
all of our funds reside with the comptroller in what's called the pool. It's a pool of investments. Texas Treasury Safekeeping Trust Company, which is an investment arm of the comptroller, manages the pool.
Perfect. So we're not worried about, like this bond fund or that bank or whatever. They just take care of it.
They do, and it's kind of, think of it as a mutual fund. It's many different investments, from repos to government securities, federal securities, et cetera. So it's a culmination of diversified investments in the pool.
Great, thanks.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Martin, can you kind of summarize a little bit, Bonds, with the legislature's recent bill that Senator Lucio passed and how that affects us?
Oh, absolutely. Happy to. Senate Bill 1474 passed this last legislative session, and that helped us as well as many tax-exempt bond issuers going forward. And to step back, what was the issue and why did we need the bill? The coordinating board in statute in Texas Government Code 1372 had authority to issue up to $75 million of tax-exempt bonds on an annual basis. That worked back in the early 2000s. Our demand for the college access loans was that or a little less. Around 2010 to 2014, demand increased to $100 million. Well, at the time, there was enough available tax-exempt authority throughout the state that we could get approval for, and it wasn't an issue. It didn't come until about 2015 and 16. Our demand grew to approximately $160 million, so substantial growth in college access loan program, which outstripped our bonding authority and ability to get that, as well as we all know, that the cost of housing has increased substantially, the amount of housing. So affordable housing are entities, different types of authorities and associations that are able to issue tax-exempt bonds for the same purpose and build projects, apartment complex projects, large housing complex for affordable housing. That demand has been substantial, and we started getting to a position where we were running out of the ability to get funding to make sure we can issue enough loans for students to meet the demand in the following year. And we issue a very low interest rate loan. We're a notch above the federal government, but we are well below most what's called private student loan issuers. So we went to legislature as well as many other issuers, from housing, Texas Department of Housing Community Affairs, TSHAC, City in San Antonio was for the bill. We probably had 15 different issuers that collaborated to come up with this bill, rewrite 1372 that would work for all of us as best it can. There's not enough tax-exempt authority to the state. The federal government assigns that on a population basis. Right now, it's a little over $3 billion. So that is your available pool at a state level of $3 billion. Then it's up to the state to determine how it wants to divvy that out for its best economic needs. So we had to work with all the issuers to collaborate and come up with what our best ability was to fairness, be able to meet affordability for housing and the needs of students here. 1474 passed unanimously in the House in the main chamber and the Senate in the main chamber. And so it became active at the end of the fiscal year, and it's in play. Senator Lucio is having a interim hearing actually in Brownsville. I'll be down in your area this next week at the University of Texas RGV. And so that is a follow-up to see how things are going. Other issuers will be there as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Martin? All right. The second item under finance is consideration of adopting the staff's recommendation to the committee to issue a request for proposals for selection of a vendor for financial advisor for the agency's student loan program. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. This item, as I mentioned briefly in the other agenda item, we issue tax-exempt bonds to fund student loans. So we'll go out to market. These are marketable securities managed by the SEC, IRS regulations, state regulations. They're authorized by Texas Constitution. And we'll issue bonds. We'll go to market. We plan on going to market because of 1474. We used to have to go to market typically in January. So this month, we'd typically be selling for next academic year. So it's kind of, I've given the board this analogy in the past. It's kind of like you buying a house, but you're building it. You're not going to close on it until August, and yet you're going to start your mortgage today. We were spending $4 million annually in interest needlessly because of the timing, the restrictions in that statute. Now we're able to issue, and we're planning on issuing around mid-July, so we start meeting the need when the academic years start in middle of August, and that will run through next year. Those tax-exempt bonds, again, they're marketable securities. We work with various investors, but with that, we engage financial advisor to help support us on various aspects of this. So one, they help advise on timing of the market. They help advise on whether we go competitive bid to negotiated bid. Competitive, we go to market, think of it as eBay. Negotiated, in the times of the financial crisis, the agency did perform negotiated. So you get with one vendor or maybe two, and you try and negotiate the pricing and the terms of the deal because it was such a constrained market. Right now, we issue general obligation, or they are general obligations of the state. They're private activity bonds. So we assume the same in our rating agency, Standard & Poor's and Moody's, are who we utilize the AAA rating for the state. So it really helps us out being able to get a favorable yield on these bonds, lower our interest cost. Again, think of it as a mortgage. We want low interest so that when we issue loans to students, we can give them low interest loans as well and pass that on. We do not make money. It's not a for-profit program, what have you. And by our IRS rules, we are capped at the amount of differential from the loan interest rate or the yield that we generate when you net in defaults and other items versus the yield on the bonds. And we're limited at 2% differential there, which we've typically been well under going forward. So this is for a 2-year. Our current agreement ends the end of this fiscal year, August 31st, 2020. This is for the request for proposal, since it is over $100,000. It does require committee approval to go to market. We'll do an RFP and then select a vendor. Once we select a vendor through all the bids, proposals, reviews, we will then go to board chair, board vice chair, and AOC chair for final approval of selection of the vendor. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
RFP, can you just share with the board how many, as a financial advisor, how many financial advisors respond to the RFP?
Sure, I can give you estimates, and the one item here is the student lending, the private student lending is a much smaller market. So if you look at the $1.6 trillion of total student debt nationwide, approximately 92% are from federal loans. Only 8% are private lenders. We are a private lender. We're a state government entity, but from a student lending standpoint, if you're not federal, you're considered private. So the amount of support from a software standpoint, from a financial advisor that really knows bonds. There are bond financial advisors out there that they can help you on issuing the bonds, but they may not have expertise in student lending, and that's the piece that we really try and get, as well as these are tax-exempt bonds, so they are subject to that 2% rule that I mentioned. So every year, our financial advisor has to perform what's called an arbitrage rebate calculation for each discrete bond series we've issued to make sure we have not exceeded that differential.
Any other questions for Mr. Martin? Seeing no questions, do I have a motion to issue a request for proposal for selection of a vendor for financial advisor for the agency student loan program? So moved. Motion made by Dr. Farias. Second? Second by Mr. Campbell. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Seeing no opposition, the motion passes. Thank you. The next item under finance is consideration of adopting recommendations for bond, and I'll say bond legal counsel. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and that clarification. This item is very similar to our financial advisor, so we also engage bond counsel. This is a very unique and very regulated world that we live in with these tax-exempt bonds, and we want to make sure we have absolute compliance. And I'll just give you that moment of what if we didn't. So these are tax-exempt. An investor gets these, and let's say you had a 5% interest rate. Let's say that's the market rate on a taxable bond. Well, an investor may be willing to take 4% on a tax-exempt bond. Why would they do that? Because let's say they're in a 20% tax bracket. If you're a 5% interest rate on a taxable bond, you're effectively earning 4% after taxes. But you'll take 4% on a bond that doesn't charge taxes. There's no federal tax on it, which is great, but it's highly regulated, so we engage bond counsel to help us navigate all the intricacies from issuing to tax compliance, but also our bond counsel also helps us on various changes in the market. So there are times where the federal government's proposing tax law changes, and we have actually tried to make decisions because sometimes you don't know how they're going to go, and you're in December trying to issue, or maybe in January, but the tax law could come effect in January, and we've had to pull our deals and go to market in December. Now with the Senate Bill 1474, that alleviates a lot from us not having to go there. So this is for bond counsel. This does contemplate 2 issues, so it's a 2-year period. So 1 new bond issue for each academic year. So we'll have 1 issue, we call it 2020 or 2021, and then we'll have a 2022 issue. It also contemplates, because we're in such a low interest rate environment right now, if the other board members remember, we have refunded or refinanced a couple older series that we've had, and we've saved up to $50 million in future cash flow from the 3 of those refinancings that we performed. So we contemplate that are in here in the amount for the RFP that we'll have 2 refinancings as well, 1 each year. Our bonds are callable and on 10-year periods. So if we issue a bond in 2020, then in 2030, any of the bonds still remaining series, we'll have basically in 1 large issue, we'll have bonds starting year 4 all the way out. So you have a 4-year bond, a 5-year bond, 6-year bond, all the way to year 24. Any of the bonds beyond the 10 years are subject to call, subject to being refinanced. And if interest rates are favorable, we can go out to market. And right now, the present value savings for our 2010 series bonds is around $18 million. So we are in the planning stages of trying to go to market with that as well. Right now, the Tax-Exempt Authority, we're in 2 different buckets. I won't go into the detail of 1474, but that one is constrained. A lot of housing and infrastructure is in there, and right now it's about $200 million oversubscribed, but we're hoping that there will be some cancellations. We did put in an application with the Bond Review Board. We're hoping there'll be some cancellations between now and July. We feel fairly strong that we'll be able to get in and get this. If not, we would then put another request in earlier next year, and then anytime after 8/31 of 2020, we'd be able to refund these 2010 series bonds. But obviously, the earlier you go in, the more you can save.
If you refinance a bond, do you have to retest the arbitrage on the loans that were made?
We do, and it's a unique thing, and it's unfortunate that you could look at the original bond, I'll call it the 2010 bond series. We do not, we're negative on arbitrage, meaning we do not show that we're going to owe any money to the Treasury. When we refund those, we pay those off. The new bonds, the clock starts with the new bonds. So take the loan cash flow at that point going forward, take those bonds and bond payment going forward, and it gets recalculated. I don't get to take that negative and carry it over. So if I had a positive in one and a negative, I can't net the 2 together. It's unfortunate. Our 2013 series bond, we do, it was a culmination in one of them of refinancings. My team and I went back and looked at that and some variable rate bonds and some other items, and we are slightly, probably about $4 or $5 million over right now, trending on the arbitrage. So 2023, we may be having to pay that to the U.S. Treasury. But that's on one series. And you think about it on the, if you're refinancing, the savings would be substantially higher than that. So it's still a good deal. It's just unfortunate that in that one series, we did have some negative we weren't able to carry forward to net and help us out.
Any other questions for Mr. Martin?
Before, you mean, it's before questions, is he going to finish here?
Well,
I have other questions for him, but,
that's why I said, are there any other questions
yes,
for Mr. Martin?
but not for this particular issue, but I've got a couple of other questions for him.
Relating to this issue? or-
Not this particular issue, but before he
Okay,
steps
all
down.
right. Well, then, do I have a motion to issue a request for proposal for selection for vendor for bond counsel relating to performance of legal services for the agency in support of the student loan program? I have
I'll move.
have a motion by Ms. Schwartz, second.
Second.
Second by Dr. Farias. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing and hearing no opposition, the motion passes. The next item, the final item on the finance, is consideration of adopting the staff's recommendations to the committee for proposal to enter into a 5-year lease agreement to secure the current agency location with 1,200 Anderson Partners with an early termination clause option. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So some of the members I've spoken to about this, the agency approximately 2 years ago was assigned to one of the new buildings. There are two being built currently in downtown Capitol Complex area. And Texas Facilities Commission manages the assignment and those buildings and our lease, et cetera. So we've been tapped to go to those, and in September we finally received a formal letter saying we've been approved, and the Facilities Commission had formal approval in November. So all the other items other than board approval here have been completed for us to extend our lease. The one building, I'll show you some, discuss some breakouts, but the one building is due to be built, the one we're being assigned, the George H.W. Bush building, in May of 2022. That's at least when, that's not the move date, that's when they expect to complete and probably have most of the interior, of course, and we'll have to do some wiring, some other infrastructure specific to the agency. So I don't have a complete move date, but you could contemplate it a couple months after that. This, the current lease that we're in was a 10-year lease for this facility. It expires at the end of June of 2020. So this is a request to extend the lease. The Facilities Commission worked with the lessor to extend our lease to for a minimum or for a maximum of 5-year period, but we would have an early termination clause since it is, it could be fluid with this new building and how far out this item would be. So I'm happy to answer any questions. The estimate is on here and any of the other facts within it. We will probably, in this legislative appropriation request, be working with the Facilities Commission to request additional money for the move, which we'll need. So if the building is 2022, that'll fall in next biennium, of which we'll need funding for moving and potentially any infrastructure build-out costs. But the Facilities Commission right now, there's very little information. We don't know how many floors will be occupied. We don't know the specific space assignment. We provided information to them as far as org structure so they can determine the number of offices, the sizes, cubicle space, and that way they can engage an architect who should then be engaging us at some point soon, hopefully, to be able to actually determine space within that building, what floors will be on, et cetera. We do know that there will be a parking garage that is under the building, so that is nice, that you can drive in on a rainy day, a cold day, and take an elevator and walk right up, into the building. If you've been down to the Capitol complex, a visitor parking I go to, you walk several blocks before you get to the Capitol or any other building. So that will be nice. I do have a picture here, and Mary, if you can hit play. This is from the Facility Commission's website. And just to give you a visual of it, to the right there, you can barely see the Bob Bullock Museum. It's just about to exit the picture. And just down below on the left was a parking space flat. And those two buildings on the left and right exist today. They're not new. They've been there for a while. And that parking space that you see coming up is the second building of this phase. We will be in that other empty parking spot you just saw. This is where the other building's going to be. And Mary, if you can switch to the other video. Facilities Commission did a great job with this. So if you can, and Mary, hang on one sec. The upper left corner there, that's a rendition of what the building will look like, the completed building. Right now, if you go there, there's about 2 stories above ground and about 3 or 4 underground of a parking garage. It's not very pretty, but that's the rendition. You can see the Bob Bullock Museum in the middle, and then you can see those 2 buildings I just pointed out that exist today on the left and right. See the green right down, all the lawn in there? Mm-hmm. That is what used to be Congress Avenue. So Congress Avenue between those buildings will no longer exist. It'll be closed down, and they're calling it the Capitol Mall. They're going to put in trees, kind of a park-like area. You'll be able to walk straight from that building, any Bob Bullock Museum, right down that mall, straight to the Capitol or Capitol Extension. So they're really going to make a very unique area out of this, trying to enhance the Capitol complex. They do have funding for 2 more buildings, which will be phase 2, and those are timed for a couple years out. I won't go into detail of those, just the specifics of ours. And Mary, if you can hit play. This will just give you a little bit of a close-up of the building. But just to note, about 2 floors of that building are actually a parking garage, the way they have it set up. So they've at least disguised that, and then it goes up from there. And this gives you a little bit of view. You can see the tip of the Capitol off in the distance, and then you can see the mall area that'll take you down there. Thank you, Mary. That's
Very
good.
nice.
So
Any
again,
questions?
this is just to approval to extend our lease with the optional early termination period. So if the building is delayed, it covers us. If it comes in early, we can, with advance notice, terminate the lease and be able to execute our move.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Any questions for Mr. Martin on this
I
question?
have a comment. That could cut into Texas football tailgating, by the way. That's prime location there on Saturdays. Those aren't my questions or comments, but I do have.
We're going to get to these questions at some point.
No early termination lease penalties?
No.
Okay.
Our lessor was in agreement to not have those. I believe I can disclose this, his bank requires a 5-year lease minimum, so that's why the 5 years. But being a very large project, sometimes these don't always come in on time, so the 5 years at least covers us just in case. And it locks us in a current rate, that leases, housing, et cetera, is going up, so costs are going up. This at least locks us into the negotiated price.
Okay, and then my final point is, of course, contingent on our general counsel reviewing everything, obviously, correct?
That is correct. General counsel has seen the lease extension and provided comments, of which we provided to the Facilities Commission.
Any other questions for Mr. Martin on the questions about the lease extension? Do I have a motion to enter into a 5-year lease agreement to secure the current agency location with 1200 Anderson Partners with an early termination option? Motion by Mr. Stedman. Second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Campbell. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing or seeing no opposition, the motion passes. Mr. Martin, thank you for your report.
Can I have my question now for Mr. Martin? Did it
Oh, I'm sorry. I
That's
thought
okay.
those were your questions. Okay, yes, go ahead.
One question and a comment.
I almost got out of here on time.
This might be a toughie for you. So, no, this is really actually for the new members. On the budget part, I should have brought this earlier, but monthly financial report part on page 3 of, this is for the benefit of the new members, 3 of 11, for Mr. Campbell, Mr. Torn, and Ms. Schwartz, who are new to the board. We oversee all the public universities and community colleges and technical colleges, but if you look on page 3, Baylor College of Medicine is listed, and so you may get questions sometime about the budget and general medical education, GME, and how we look at those funds through the coordinating board, since it's Baylor College of Medicine, a private school. So I think for the benefit of the new members, I think, could you just kind of review that, how Baylor College of Medicine is in our operating budget? Because I know I had a question when I was a new member about that, and it took me kind of a little bit to figure
Absolutely. And this is different. So Baylor College of Medicine, the state does perform formula funding for our public institutions, takes general revenue, disperses formula funding for all the different institutions from undergraduate and graduate programs, et cetera. Baylor College of Medicine, the state at the time, years ago, decades ago, this was the only medical school in the state. So the state agreed to help fund the medical school with Baylor, and if you call it a partnership. And so this is performed similar, that is formula funded. The Legislative Budget Board actually coordinates the calculation with data from Baylor and then determines the amount. So it does wind up in our appropriation, our bill pattern. And in the past, we used to disperse the funds straight to Baylor College of Medicine, either one, and for them to utilize and manage their programs. Baylor, a couple years ago, coordinated with the Health and Human Services Commission different programs. I cannot get you into the detail of the programs. I don't understand them that well. But different programs where the federal government was providing a match in funding. And so for every dollar that Baylor contributed to support need-based type medical patients, that the federal government would match on a $1 or $2, $1 to $2 basis. So Baylor wanted to redirect the funding to this initiative and has done so continuously. We have an agreement with Baylor and then Health and Human Services Commission for this program. So that's been inserted, and Baylor reaps a benefit, or Baylor Medical, from being able to serve needy and yet be able to help recapture some of the costs through this federal program. But that is our funding, and the one fact, in our legislative appropriation request, we actually do not include this. So it comes to us based on the Legislative Budget Board and Ledge analysis and their funding. It gets put into our bill, but we take it out when we submit our legislative appropriation request because we actually do not control that dollar amount. I'm happy to.
Any other questions for Mr. Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Martin, for that report. The next item is an update on internal audit reports and activities. This item does not require any action. Mr. Mark Pohl, Director of Internal Audit and Compliance, and Mr. Paul Mayart, Assistant Director of Internal Audit and Compliance, will present this update to the committee and be available for questions. Gentlemen.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. This agenda item is informational and gives the results of our internal audit work since we last visited in October. We completed 2 internal audit projects since that meeting, and those reports are in your materials today. First, we had a a follow-up report for our June 2018 audit of the formula funding process here within the agency, and I'm pleased to report that all 5 recommendations from that prior report were implemented. The second report that you have is part of our ongoing look at contract administration within the coordinating board. As you know, contract administration is a very publicized area in Texas state government. So at the recommendation of our partners at the Texas State Auditor's Office, we look at aspects of contracting or contract administration each year as part of our internal audit plan. And we've done this for the past probably 5 years. So you have the latest engagement there, and I'll ask my assistant, Paul Mayert, to walk you through the results of the most recent report. Paul?
Thank you, Mark. The contract administration report in your materials contain 1 recommendation of our area of focus at this time in contract management. Contract administration of competitive grants is managed by our agency, and that's the area that we were looking at here is limited to the competitive grant area. What we saw is that the grantee selection risks in this area have not been adequately identified by management so that policies and controls can be strengthened. For example, there is minimal amount of written documentation or policies regarding how competitive grant selection committees are structured or what is allowable or unallowable for selection of committee members. Management's agreed with our recommendation and stated that the risk assessment as well as modified written policies and procedures will be put into place by the end of this month. If you have any further questions on it, I'd be happy to answer.
Any questions for Mr. Pohl or Mr. Mayart? Thank you. The next agenda item, agenda 8, is an update on compliance monitoring reports and activities. This item does not require any action. Mr. Pohl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've completed 8 projects, compliance monitoring projects, since our prior meeting in October, and you have each of those reports in your materials today. I'm pleased to report that 6 of the 8 engagements had no reportable findings or recommendations. There were 2 engagements, and they were both related to the Nursing Shortage Reduction Program grant at Clarendon College and one at the University of Texas Permian Basin And both of those engagements had recommendations related to the need to better account for grant funds and to comply with grant restrictions. And you'll see the management response is within the final report for those engagements, and management was agreeable to make those improvements. Unless you have any questions on those reports, I had one other item I'd like to quickly relay.
Please.
Thank you. I'd like to take a moment to update you on a new line of work that we're busy planning for in compliance monitoring. If you recall or were present at the December special call board meeting, you received a briefing from agency staff regarding rules adopted regarding Senate Bill 12, which is the reporting of sexual misconduct by institutions of higher education. So this is a very high-profile, hot topic area. We've been working closely with agency staff on a plan of action regarding the role of compliance monitoring in this area. All institutions of higher education in Texas, numbering some 150, will begin reporting information to the coordinating board at the end of this calendar year, 2020. To assess accuracy and completeness of this reporting, I've been in discussions with the commissioner regarding our staffing and the possibility of receiving an additional compliance monitoring FTE due to this increased volume of work related to SB 12. So we'll continue working with the commissioner, with our program staff, and certainly with the institutions of higher education as we prepare to take on this new area of reporting and the need to ensure that what gets reported is accurate and supported.
Can you just, for the benefit of like Mr. Campbell and I guess Mr. Torn, just kind of give them a brief, just kind of a brief overview of what Senate Bill 12 requires?
SB 212 is related to the reporting of sexual misconduct by employees of institutions of higher education. So it's not student reporting. This is related to employees at those institutions, and it requires prompt reporting of these instances. It has a provision that if an employee knowingly does not report an instance that they're aware of, there can be actually criminal penalties imposed. And uniquely for this agency, to my knowledge, it provides for an administrative penalty structure related to non-compliance with the legislation. So, for instance, if an institution had a track record of poor or misleading reporting and they were not making appropriate remediation of issues that get identified, brought to their attention, the bill allows for a penalty up to $2 million that could be assessed. And so that those assessments will be made by the coordinating board. Compliance monitoring is sort of on the front line of that assessment area, and so we obviously will continue to work really closely with the institutions. Talked with the commissioner about just the importance of the educational aspect of this, because we certainly don't want any institution to find themselves in non-compliance. So there's a lot of education and preparation to be done. So it was reporting of those instances by employees. That's the thrust. All those instances that get reported to ultimately to the institution's chief executive officer get summarized, and that report then gets provided to the coordinating board on an annual basis.
On that issue.
Not on that issue. I have another question. Another question. Mr. Paul, for the benefit of the new members, and we have 3 that are relatively new, can you tell us a little bit about some of us veterans have sat in some interesting meetings and issues with your particular expertise, but pretty much about your division and what it is that you do in terms of these like compliance letters and the staffing that you have and what you've done. Because I mean, I've learned a lot, and compliance, you know, I think your division, the coordinating board's here to help institutions and making sure they understand and educate them what they're supposed to do. But your area is very important, and you and I have sat and talked before, and other members have, and we've run into some issues, not us, institutions have, that we want to let people know that, you know, there are guidelines and things, and we don't like to, you know, punish people, but your division is compliance, and we want people to comply with trusted funds for the board.
Certainly. And, you know, the compliance monitoring area, which is what Dr. Frias is referring to, it was established in 2013, and you know, it looks at the compliant use of. You just had a presentation earlier by Mr. Martin on the trustee portion of this agency's budget, which is a huge dollar amount. All of those grants, whether those are academic grants or student assistance type grants, the loan program, all of those things have a host of compliance restrictions, safeguarding of assets to protect students, to protect the state of Texas. And so, so our compliance monitoring team, which numbers 4 presently, they do a risk-based plan each year and travel to the institutions or perform desk reviews with the institutions and look at, you know, really monitor the compliance with the requirements.
Any other questions for Mr.
Yes.
Pohl?
Quick question. Prior to, you said that was implemented in 2014.
Yes.
Prior to that, what kind of compliance monitoring or auditing of all of these various things was occurring?
Prior to that, it was conducted within the internal audit function. So there was no distinction. Internal audit covered both the internal aspects of the agency's operations as well as they would travel to the institutions to look at, you know, to audit grants and other things. So this really gave it its own identity, its own distinction, and I think it's worked quite well. Sure.
Any other questions for these gentlemen? Gentlemen, thank you both.
Thank you.
For agenda item 9, we will be going into executive session. The board will meet in closed session to deliberate the following matter. Pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.076, the board would meet in closed session to discuss the agency legacy modernization project. No other business will be discussed before we reconvene in open session, and no votes will be taken in executive session. The time is 3:06 p.m. Yeah, my audience is all gone. All right. The executive session has concluded. No action was taken during the executive session. The time is 3:40 p.m. The committee is now reconvened in regular session. With that, I think that concludes the Agency Operations Committee, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second? Motion by Dr. Farias, second by Mr. Stedman. All in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.